What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to part 2 of What If Deku Ate the Jiki Jiki no Mi. As of this current moment, I'm making this video the next day after I recorded the first part, and currently I haven't uploaded it because I overslept. I'm gonna be real with you guys. I overslept and I was just like, you know what? Let me upload it tomorrow and just have one extra video ready for my members, right? So here we are today. I have no idea how the first video performed, if it did good, if it did bad or anything, but this is going to be the second out of 3 parts that are going to be out total. That said, if you're going to enjoy this video at any point, make sure to like, subscribe, and do all that good stuff. That being said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We pick our story off with All Might saying, I am here, coming in like a normal person. You know, obviously All Might barges in the classroom. He starts bathing in the glory and he's pretty much just expecting it. Everybody in the class is giving him like the most hype and everything. And Bakugo's trying his hardest not to fanboy. Deku looks at All Might. He thinks he's pretty cool, but he's not exactly going to show it because the man is a hard ass. And you guys might be wondering, why is Izuku so much like Kid from One Piece? Well, I'm gonna put it to you guys this way. When somebody eats a devil fruit power, it basically is like absorbing a part of the previous user's soul. And since the previous user was used as Kid, Izuku developed some tendencies that he would have had otherwise. That's why Izuku has the red hair, has the glasses. Obviously, he wouldn't be this close, and the appearance is mostly just because of me. But the personality traits and stuff like that, yeah, that's all me. That said though, anyway, so basically what ends up happening following this little All Might altercation thingy whatever is he goes on to tell everybody to pick names from this hat. They go on to do so and they get paired for the 2 versus 2 hero versus villain battle. Following this, Izuku ends up pretty much being paired with Mineta. He looks to Mineta and Mineta's like, great, I'm gonna path with you by my side. Izuku then looks to his opponents, and his opponents that he's going to be facing is Tsuyu Mineta versus not Tsuyu Mineta, but Tsuyu versus Kirishima. Izuku, after seeing this, would think to himself that seems like an easy thing to do. He looks to Kirishima's red hair and thinks that it looks pretty cool, and from here he goes on to walk towards Mineta, or walk away from him, seeing as Izuku doesn't need any help. He works alone. Izuku from this point pretty much goes on to just kind of go towards the first level of the area, and as soon as All Might blows the whistle for them to begin, Izuku decides that he's not going to be playing any types of games. Izuku would pretty much go on to hold his hand out, and the metal in the entire building would begin coming towards him. It just begins piling up on him. And he takes the metal from places so that the building's infrastructure wouldn't be weakened. So, you know, obviously it doesn't collapse on him. It can if he wants it to, but seeing as the simulation is a bomb scenario, he can't exactly cause the building to just collapse on itself. That said, what Izuku pretty much ends up doing is just collecting so much scrap metal until eventually he makes it to the room with Tsuyu and Mineta. Once inside, Izuku has a gigantic robot thing around himself, and he goes on to form 2 giant hands made out of scrap metal, right? From here, he goes on to punch towards the direction of both Tsuyu and Kirishima, and this would leave Mineta to essentially come running in with his little diaper costume and jump onto the bomb, leading to the hero's eventual victory of the villains. This would lead to Izuku and Mineta going towards the hero screening room where they were watching the battle go down, and Momo would begin talking about how, you know, Izuku's the MVP, you know, he did everything right, he did nothing wrong, yada yada yada. Eventually what ends up pretty much going down following these little events is we want to have about 2 days worth of break where Izuku is pretty much just spending his time playing guitar, vibing out, passing out, and watching a classic Zether video, because come on now, what could possibly be better than watching one of my videos? Other than literally everything else. Anyways, though, On a different note, a couple of days following this, the USJ event is actually going to be happening very soon. So all the students were asked to go take permission slips, and they were all pretty much doing, their thing, trying to get their permission slips signed by their parents. What ends up essentially going down following this is they all pretty much find themselves in the cafeteria when suddenly the bell goes off, right? The bell starts flashing everywhere and everyone starts freaking out. Izuku wasn't actually picked for classroom president, and it was actually Ida this time. So instead, what ends up pretty much going down is Ida goes on to tell everybody to calm down, that UA students should not do or act such as this when it comes to a potential villain threat, that they're heroes and that, they should feel embarrassed for what they did. Everybody realizes this, and from here they go on to take a chill pill before then following Ida's directions and calming down. Later, only to realize that it was just the press. Only, quote unquote, since a villain did actually help them bust in, and that villain was, I'm pretty sure, Shigaraki. That said, what ends up essentially going down after this is basically Izuku is on the bus. Right, he's on the bus on his way to the USJ alongside Jiro, him and her listening to some tunes. Jiro goes on to show Izuku something, and he's like, nah, it's not punk rock enough. He goes on to show her something else, and Jiro's like, you know what, this is actually kind of nice. She ends up liking it. Izuku and her vibe in the back. Kirishima says that Izuku's manly, that his quirk is awesome, and Tsuyu brings up who the strongest person in the classroom could possibly be. She says that from the looks of it, it's probably Todoroki, seeing as he was the one who dealt with the team that he was facing the quickest. Then they go on to essentially make their way towards the USJ, arriving only for 13 to ruin the surprise and give a boring speech about how quirks are dangerous. What a surprise! Superpowers in the hands of humans, like literally the most dangerous species in the world, is dangerous? What? Ain't no way. No way. No way. Anyways, as many of you guys are probably expecting, eventually a purple portal would appear in the middle of the stadium of the USJ. Everybody gets their guards up, and Kurigiri would go on to teleport everybody away, with the exception of one. Actually, never mind, no exceptions. Izuku gets thrown onto the boat too, and he ends up being saved by Tsuyu, ultimately being thrown on the boat because I don't want Tsuyu and Mineta to die, because realistically, if Izuku's not there, they die like 9 times out of 10. That said though, what I believe ends up happening after this is essentially Ida proceeds to break out and go call All Might, and Izuku would essentially use his quirk to create, to pretty much shoot a bunch of scrap metal towards his direction, and also use the sand that's in the area to suck the iron out of it. It comes to his direction in small particles, and Izuku then begins to kind of clump it all together so that it's able to create one giant fist. He then throws it into the water, and it begins to essentially go around just hitting everybody, knocking them out in the water, leading to a couple of them, how do I put this, drowning. Anyways though, what ends up happening following this is Izuku goes towards the direction of the mainland, where he ends up witnessing Aizawa's appearance, and what he sees is not particularly pleasant. He sees Aizawa's head getting smashed in by the Nomu, with Shigaraki scratching his neck and a purple mist portal like dude standing in the middle of all of that. Izuku, seeing this, would say that that's repulsive, and from here he gets angry. He proceeds to essentially use his ability to try to hit the Nomu, but the Nomu just tanks it. It eats it like a champ, and it then goes on to regenerate, rushing towards the direction of Izuku. He's shocked because never before had an attack of his not been, not worked. And even though the Nomu looks scary, he was thinking that maybe it was just one of those appear scary, actually be weak people. But plot twist, the Nomu's actually pretty fearsome. That said though, what ends up essentially going down following this little altercation is basically Izuku then goes on to get absolutely beaten down by the Nomu. Izuku gets pretty much ragdolled and punched away by the Nomu, and his ribcage literally almost shatters because, it gets broken and one of his bones is pretty much pulverized, and Izuku coughs out blood, right? He's on the ground spinning out of control, but when Izuku lifts his head up, he is seething with rage. Never before had somebody attacked him like that and gotten away with it. Izuku looks towards the direction of the Nomu and says, "You damn bastard!" As from here, his Conqueror's Haki just goes off the charts, and everybody in the USJ feels his Conqueror's Haki. They fall to the ground, at least all the weak people, and most of the villains would end up pretty much getting knocked unconscious. One of the people who gets knocked out is Shigaraki himself, and following this, Kurogiri would actually go on to grab Shigaraki and get on out of there. Izuku was able to actually kind of make the Nomu a bit scared, but since it has no sentience, it didn't really bother the Nomu. Izuku from here proceeded to rush at the Nomu with armament Haki around himself as he proceeded to punch at the Nomu's face, and the Nomu just pretty much stood there. It literally stood there and ate it like a champ. Izuku was getting angrier and angrier by the second, and from here he would go on to create a gigantic robot made out of metal scraps, not caring about the building's infrastructure falling or collapsing because his pride's wounded. And Izuku's not letting that slide. Because him personally, he ain't no B word. That said though, he would go on to pretty much begin to beat the Nomu around a little bit. And eventually, the Nomu would get its bearings together. And with his super speed, he would pretty much begin dismantling all of Izuku's little magnetized robot pieces. Keep in mind, Izuku's not really as strong as Eustace Kid. He has his abilities, but if you really think about it, he's not facing the same opponents that he does. His powers and stuff like that don't exactly scale the same amounts. While it is the same thing, they're watered down weak versions. There will only be one Eustace Kid. That said though, what ends up pretty much following this is All Might arrives. He ends up being angry, pulverizes the Nomu, and sends it flying Team Rocket style. Izuku pretty much ends up falling out unconscious because he overused his Jiki Jiki no Mi ability, and it ended up giving him a throbbing headache. When he wakes up, he realizes that they have 1 week off school, which he decides to use to its fullest extent, deciding to train as hard as he possibly can so that the next time he has to fight something like the Nomu, he's ready. It's never gonna happen again, Izuku would think. Following this though, he goes on a trade for a week and ends up pretty much amping his abilities and powers just a bit more, and eventually he makes his way towards the UA podium, where he ends up giving his speech the day of the UA Sports Festival after being informed by All Might himself that he's actually going to be the one responsible for that. One thing that I really want to mention now is that Izuku was actually offered a certain special power. The power of One for All. And you guys might be like, okay, so Izuku probably took it, right? Yeah, you're right. I mean, normally I'd probably be like, oh, Izuku said that he doesn't need somebody else's power, but Eustace Kid doesn't care. Like, bro, I don't think Izuku would care about how he gets stronger. He just wants to get stronger. So Izuku ends up taking One for All, and due to the fact that he has no quirk and it's actually a devil fruit, it pretty much ends up matching Izuku's body perfectly and giving him 0 drawbacks, allowing him to access to a huge amount of One for All's power, but not exactly full cowling, seeing as Izuku isn't able to actually learn that until later when he goes to internship with Gran Torino, after his defeat of everybody else in the UA Sports Festival. Because let's be honest, the devil fruit abilities plus One for All, nobody's stopping Deku. The first event would be the race, and as many of you guys are probably gonna expect, Izuku would pretty much end up coming in 2nd place. Yeah, Izuku's fast or whatever for normal humans, but he's just a base human. He can't slide around in ice or fly like Bakugo can, so he comes in 2nd place after stalling Bakugo long enough for Todoroki to get first. When it comes to the cavalry battle, Izuku would get in Todoroki's way and inevitably end up stealing the headband from Bakugo after Bakugo took it from Todoroki in a very slick-like fashion, saying, "You snooze, you lose" in the process. Before then, the event proceeds to end and Bakugo looks at Deku with an angry expression on his face. Following these events, we have the 1v1 battles with Shinso versus Deku. When Shinso opens his mouth and begins to essentially trash talk Izuku, Izuku's not having any of it. Izuku's not going to be like, oh, well, like talk back to Shinso. He's not about words. He's about that action. So when Shinso starts talking crap about him, telling him that he's so blessed to have these powers, Izuku doesn't say a word. He rushes to Shinso and pummels this man in front of thousands of people and on live television. People begin to say that that was a little brutal, but some of them actually enjoyed it. More of the people who actually enjoy those types of fights or beatdowns. That said though, we then go into the second battle, which would consist of Todoroki versus Izuku Midoriya. What ends up happening in this portion of the thing is basically once Todoroki shoots a giant geyser of ice at the direction of Deku, Deku is almost caught off guard. Had it not been for the fact that he actually used his ability to repel Todoroki to move him out of the way slightly with his sand. So how do I explain this? So basically here, let me kind of put the scene together. So imagine Izuku has the ability to essentially control like iron sand, or no, not like iron sand, but like iron follicles in the earth. Those little, those little grains of iron or whatever end up clumping together, right? And he ends up having access to a pretty large amount of, attacking things, right? Plus scrap metals in there, and like minerals and whatever and whatnot are in the ground. So Izuku is basically able to, how do I put this? So picture it like this. Izuku gets shot at by an ice glacier, and Izuku gets shot up pretty high and almost falls off of the geyser, leading to Todoroki's win. But he's able to hold on just long enough for him to use his sand to essentially grab onto Todoroki and yank him to the ground, like yank him out of bounds so that Todoroki was able to essentially lose. Some of you guys right here might be like, hey, yo, but Eustace can't do that. How come Izuku could do that? Well, I mean, it's magnet. He can control magnetized forces. And I'm almost positive that Izuku would definitely be able to do something like that by essentially pushing and pulling the sand to his whim. Like he pulls it to go forward, he pushes it back, he pulls and pushes, essentially is how he was able to control it. And all he had to do was pull it towards Todoroki. Once it was a hold of him, it basically proceeded to pull back and pretty much go back into the earth. Todoroki got flung out of the stadium and then proceeded to lose. And Izuku just watched in absolute just joy that he had just defeated this Todoroki kid or whatever. That said, he would then go on to face his final opponent, which consists of Katsuki Bakugo. Now this battle is not exactly worth covering because we already saw what happened in the classroom a couple months ago. Bakugo gets absolutely decimated and beat down by Deku, and it doesn't matter exactly what it is that Bakugo does, because Izuku was not playing no games. He uses his Conqueror's Haki on Bakugo, and Bakugo passes out immediately, leading to a quick victory from the hand of Izuku. Izuku also, mind you, could have done the same thing to Todoroki, but he wanted to make it seem as if it was a fair battle. That said though, they go on to essentially get the medals, and Bakugo is angry, but not exactly as much as he was in canon. That said though, they eventually make their way back to class, where Izuku is able to actually pick who he wants to internship. He ends up wanting to go with some random rock badass hero, but Toshinori, or All Might, ends up suggesting to him that he goes with his old master, which is essentially Gran Torino. And since All Might is now his technical sensei, he decides, whatever, I might as well go check this old guy out. So he ends up going to intern with Gran Torino. And these next 3 minutes are essentially just going to be spent with me speedrunning the Stain arc, because I could just do that. Okay, hear me out. So Izuku ends up making his way towards the Gran Torino residence. Once he arrives and he sees the old man laying on the floor with ketchup on him, Izuku just proceeds to walk towards him and then walk away. Doesn't even call the police, doesn't freak out, and he just walks away. He's like, not my problem. Gran Torino wakes up and he's like, kid, you were just gonna let me die? And Izuku looks at him and says, dude, even if you were dead, you were already dead. What was I gonna protect or do? Gran Torino's like, you kind of got a point. But from here, he proceeds to essentially use his quirk to beat on Deku and tell him that he's not allowed to rely on his quirk for the entirety of his time there, that he's going to be working on one for all. And essentially Izuku does so, except since he has more muscle mass, he's able to actually control a grand total of 20%, leading to Izuku actually being able to keep up with Gran Torino somewhat. Eventually, the situation happens where they go to Sosu City, and with Izuku's 20% control of full cowling, he's able to actually defeat Stain without even relying on anything other than his armament hockey, as well as one for all. And you guys are probably like, why'd you give Izuku one for all? It's just in his nature. If I was to not have done that, then he still would have been OP. Let's be realistic here. He still would have clobbered everybody in the series with just a bit more training. But this is kind of going to be overkill. That said though, he goes on to defeat Stain. Todoroki's never called. Ida gets saved even though he shouldn't have been, because he should have learned his lesson via death. Because it's like, bro, you make a mistake, you gotta deal with the consequences, my brother. Anyways though, he ends up pretty much meeting the dog policeman guy, who ends up telling him that he's not going to be getting any credit because of some whack reasons. Izuku looks to him and tells him that he's not going to be telling him if he can or can't get credit. Izuku says he's getting the credit. Not only that, but he's not going to stop him from using his quirk. It doesn't work like that. He saved this city, so they should be grateful. They should throw him a parade right now. What did he do in all of his cops? Nothing. They were on cleanup duty. Izuku gets angry and the room visibly begins to shake, and the dog then begins to say, fine, we can have that happen, but control your temper, boy. Izuku looks to him and then says whatever, and from here he goes on to go on his phone as he just received the text from Inko, and it reads, hey Izuku, can we talk? Izuku texts back, sure. Why, what's up? And Jiro sends back, I'm pregnant.